Hey everybody, welcome to our second podcast. I'm so excited. I got to work out even more of the challenges, something even as silly as the brightness on the screen. I noticed last week the brightness was so high, or just kind of regular, but I didn't realize with all the lights in the room and stuff, so I dimmed that brightness, got better audio. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited to continue this series. And today we're going to be talking about kind of one of the passions in my life in terms of like staying motivated, staying inspired to keep going with what we're doing. And that's going to be talking about actually one of my newly favorite books. I read it last year and I talked about it with a lot of friends, but I thought it'd be really helpful if we talked about it in the context of playing an instrument. And obviously, the book is called Grit by Angela Duckworth, and the subtitle is The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And ever since I was a kid, I've always enjoyed kind of staying motivated, and I was always attracted to people that accomplished a lot and really, no matter how many kind of failures and trials came their way, they always picked themselves up and kind of persevered through any adversity. And so that's what she talks about. It's really fascinating. Obviously, we can't go through the entire book. That would take hours, and better suited over a cup of coffee and a great conversation. But I just wanted to go over kind of some key points about what grit is, how she uses her metric, how she kind of analyzes it, and then just kind of a small conclusion. Then I highly recommend reading it. Again, not just for music, but just about anything in life. And before we get started, if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and the like button. It really helps us out a lot. If you're watching it on any other platform, definitely leave us a review or a like or whatever's available. It really helps us out a lot, so we really appreciate that. So with that said, let's get started. So the first thing is, let me show you on there. Yep, the importance of grit. So I'll talk about Grit by Angela Duckworth. So kind of the first question they want to answer is, what is grit? And the way she kind of defines it. And the way she defines it, we're going to go to the next. So questions on her grit questionnaire. So she initially analyzed West Point Academy in New York, the military academy. And I didn't know much about it. I researched a little bit more after I read the book. But it's really fascinating. Just really high level, top of class, high SAT scores, valedictorians, captains of sports teams. They all apply to this really high-end military academy. And out of like 4,000 applicants, they only accept about 1,200 cadets. And then even then, they have something that's called Beast. I wrote it down there. We'll look at it in a second. Like Beast Month or the Beast Academy. And they're even kind of sifts through those that are even high achievers, but they even quit because it's so intense. So she wanted to analyze what separates those that complete something of such high caliber and that ask so much of its participants from those that still had good intentions, but they didn't quite follow through. And it's pretty fascinating because she was able to kind of through scientifically figure out what traits those people have, even though on the surface it looked like they had very similar traits. Like if you and I would see them from the outside, we'd be like, well, how would we know? These seem very similar candidates. They both, again, are high achievers, have great test scores, have great success scores in their schooling and academics and extracurricular stuff. But then she found there's some elements and character traits that distinguish. So I found that kind of fascinating in terms of like students and learning something. And I know personally in my life, when I was younger, especially, I was the classic jack of all trades, master of none. I still do. I love learning, but I didn't see the value in sticking with one thing. It was mostly, this seems really fun. Let me do this for a little bit. And then when I got bored of it, I would go to the next thing, whether it was tennis or soccer or chess or learning a language or learning an instrument, that type of thing. The piano for me was kind of the first activity in my life, or maybe not even activity, but yeah, thing that I was introduced to that kind of changed my life forever, and I stuck with it. So I can give you firsthand kind of what that feels like in terms of finding something, sticking to it, and seeing the results of that, and a life changed. But what's even more fascinating about her book that she talks about is that it doesn't even matter if it's something that you're going to do forever. There's tremendous value in sticking with something that you start with and seeing it to the end. So if you commit, I'm trying to think of other things that kids do, like martial arts or a sport. even if you're not going to make a career out of, again, tennis or jiu-jitsu or stuff like that, it's still very, very important and how valuable it is to see things through. And as an adult, I think we could all agree that there really is tremendous value in finishing things. There's really no value in starting things and stopping, because then you never really know. There's always a challenge involved. So I want to read something that she put on her questionnaire and how she came up with it. So it says the other half of the questions, talking about her questionnaire, were about passion. They asked whether your interests changed from year to year, which is what I was doing, and the extent to which you have been obsessed with a certain idea or project for a short time, but later lost interest. What emerged was the grit scale. So that's how she came up with her grit scale. How many of those participants, and in this case the West Point Academy, had activities in their life that even if they didn't particularly love them all the time, that they stuck through even if they weren't super excited? And I think that's the key takeaway. Sometimes we confuse enjoying something all the time for, this isn't for me. And I think we lose so many wonderful experiences that way, because any champion that I've ever kind of seen an interview of, whether it's a sports elites, champion that have won Super Bowls or a World Series, or authors or scientists that have conquered so much, they'll always talk about the repetitiveness of what they were doing. Michael Jordan always has the famous quote, I hope I'm quoting it correctly, but he's missed twice as many baskets because he takes twice as many shots. So his rate of failure is actually higher, but he trains that much harder and he trains that much more. And that's what distinguishes people that only kind of hit a plateau and then fall off, to those that kind of get through that. I want to say, I don't even want to use the word boring, but kind of that rote, repetitive, mundane, if you will, part where we're like, I don't know. And that's what makes Olympic champions. All their stories are very similar. So that's what I found fascinating. I started to think about what makes all these people, what they have in common. And it really came down to that. Like, they just persevere. They don't wait to feel great all the time. Like, I'm going to be excited every single day. And I think that's what we mistake sometimes, especially for learning an instrument. We assume it's going to have that same euphoria and high that we get from first starting. When you first play your first chord, or if you're learning the guitar or the violin, those first few moments are super exciting because everything's new. And one of them, when you really have to work at it, I can't tell you the amount of students, obviously I won't name any names, but it's really kind of cute. I'll have a student that's like 6 years old. I'm thinking of one in particular. And she's a very, very smart little girl. And it's funny because everything came pretty easy. She's a very bright student in every aspect of her life. But then when it came to music, she found that it was a little challenging. So she would kind of act out and get really frustrated and say that she hated it because it didn't come easy. And when I spoke to the mom and the dad, they said that that's what happens with her. Since she tends to be very bright about things in general, things come pretty easy. Then when something doesn't come easy, it's very frustrating. And so that happens in music a lot, more than you think. And that's something that she covers in the book. And we'll go over that in a second. So key points about grit. So this is like in the title, the combination of passion and perseverance. So first, you have to have a passion that's enduring, right? So the idea is none of us get into an activity thinking, hey, I'll learn the piano so I can quit in 2 weeks. Nobody has that attitude. Or I'm going to start going to the gym just so I can leave in a month. Nobody thinks that. We all assume, we go into it thinking we're going to endure because we have an idea of what the reward will be if we stick through it. So that's a part of grit that we need to remind ourselves, especially when the enthusiasm wanes a little bit. Then we have to be resilient, right? Like we said before, even if things aren't exciting all the time, you have to stick through it, stay resilient, stay the course, and be focused. Hardworking, these are the character traits that she found. You have to know what you want. That's something that a conversation I have with all my students and all the parents and all my colleagues. We talk about it all the time. If you don't know what your end goal is, it's very hard to know what that path is going to look like. It's very similar to, again, working out or things like that. If you don't know what you're trying to achieve, it's very hard because it's very vague. And there is no there's no goal in sight. I don't want to say it's pointless. It's not. You're still gaining benefit from it. But if you know what you're going after, and it doesn't have to be, let's say, it doesn't have to line up with anybody else's goal. And music is very similar that way. I always tell students and parents, there's one path if your goal is to apply for Juilliard or apply for Berkeley College. That's one very different path, or become a concert pianist or play in the New York Philharmonic. And it's a very different path if your goal is to, well, I just want to enjoy music as an extra kind of like a stress relief from all the other activities and academic activities you have going on. First of all, they're both valid. One is not more valid than the other, but those are very different approaches. And so I find that a lot of times people that have had bad experiences in music is because they didn't know what they want, or their teacher or their parent imposed a goal that didn't align with what they wanted to achieve. So that knowing what you want, she mentions it, and I find that that's kind of critical in every aspect of life. So if you know, well, I want to play piano to accompany my kids to sing, that's one goal, right? But if you want to play Mozart and Rachmaninoff concertos, that's definitely going to have a different level of practice. And for your kids too, if you want your kids to have music in their life so they appreciate music, especially when they're younger, that's really the goal that you want. Because at 4 or 5, it's kind of hard to determine, well, they're going to be a concert, they're going to be the next Joshua Bell or and Sophie Mutter. You really want to kind of introduce music so they love music, so it becomes this kind of better, like, all around appreciation of music. Then determination, as we continue with the list, and most important, like we just mentioned before about knowing what you want, which is very similar, direction, right? You need to know how to get where you're going. One of my favorite analogies in terms of a ship sailing, if you set your course for 90 degrees east, I know I'm going to get this wrong, I believe 90 degrees east and 270 would be west, but if I'm wrong, just bear with me. If you travel for minutes, you might not notice a difference if you're 90 degrees or 91 degrees. But if you travel for hours, days, weeks, that 1 degree shift is going to take you in a completely different destination. And so that's why direction is extremely important. And so, 1, you have to know where you're going. And number 2, direction, how to get there. So you want to have that correct path. And that's what we've tried to do with Color Me Mozart, is to make sure that when you introduce a child to music, you know exactly how to take your child there, how to make sure they're getting a really well-rounded musical education. So then later, if they want to go in a very specific direction in terms of like playing a specific instrument, or if they do want to join the Philharmonic, they'll have a wonderful foundation in the same way that a school prepares your kids with learning their ABCs and their numbers and spelling and writing and reading, because those are the foundations for whatever else they want to do. And music is no different. So I love that part about her book. And so the West Point Academy, as I mentioned before, just some of the facts. So 1,200 cadets get accepted. That's what it's called, Beast Barracks training. 1 in 5, 20% drop out before graduation. So that's what she analyzed. Why does that 1 in 5? What is that 20%? What don't they have? And again, from the outside, it seems they're all equipped with the same drive and winner mentality, and yet still that grit level. And that's what she determined. That grit score, as it says in the last one, grit score most determined I spelled that wrong, who would stay and who would quit. So that's key, right? And so that's what I loved about her book. It's kind of this intangible quality, but I feel one that we can all identify with. And then if we start thinking of the people in our lives, you start thinking, oh, that's true. I do know some people with that grit in life, kind of that tenacity of just perseverance and passion, and just the stuff they accomplish is amazing. And a nice byproduct that she does talk about quite a bit, but that I've always enjoyed about living a life of grit and passion is that you just live a more enjoyable life. Everything is more enjoyable. Every activity, you don't, you have drive towards new things. You just appreciate things a lot more. So that's what I love also about approaching life with that passion. And this is one thing that kind of I was mentioning about my student before, that she's so talented and things come so easy. So she dedicates an entire chapter to the book called Distracted by Talent. Talent does to guarantee achievement. So sometimes someone is so talented right off the bat that it becomes actually detrimental because things come easy. So then when an actual challenge happens, they kind of quit because they're like, oh, I must be terrible at this because it doesn't come as easy as other things come. And that's completely the opposite idea, because just because something came easy, when something challenging comes, you want to persevere more. But since they don't have those perseverance muscles kind of developed because things came easy, so it kind of blew me away, because I've noticed a lot of times, I think we all know people like this. They're so talented. They'll just have tons of talent, but yet they'll give up so close to the goal, or they'll give up at the first sign of adversity. And it's because of that. They don't lack the talent. They just lack the grit. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. So let's keep going here. And I love this. So she says, to be gritty, this is towards kind of the conclusion of the book. Again, the book is so wonderful in between. I'm definitely not doing it justice in terms of analyzing the entire book, but I highly recommend it. It's very, very inspiring, and I'm sure you'll get more than, I was going to say, something out of it. You'll get tons out of it. So she says, to be gritty is to keep putting one foot in front of the other. To be gritty is to hold fast to an interesting and purposeful goal. To be gritty is to invest day after day, week after year. Day after week after year in challenging practice. To be gritty is to fall down 7 times and to rise 8. That's awesome. I love that quote. And I'm looking for, I was looking for another quote of hers, but I couldn't find it. But I love that. And that's what it is. It's just kind of one next step. Like you just go, you do one thing, one activity, you hit one little goal. And I know, in general, when they say to achieve bigger goals, you really want to break things down to manageable chunks. I do agree with that. So that way you get to the next step, and next step, and next step, and you're focused on the next step instead of kind of the overarching, I'm never going to conquer this mountain. And one great analogy I've read by John Maxwell that I also loved was I got to see him live, and it was really fascinating. And one thing he told the audience was, if you have a huge oak tree, and you went out there, your goal is to knock the oak tree down. And if you went out there with all your might and all the energy in the world, and tried to knock it down in one day, and you just whacked out and you got exhausted and you couldn't keep going, the amount of damage you would do, or not damage, but kind of progress you would make on the oak tree would be minimal. Obviously, I think we could all agree on that. No matter how big or small that oak tree was, one day of chopping would not be enough. But he said, however, if you go down there every day and take 5 chops at it, every single day consistently, he asked the audience what would eventually happen, and we all agreed obviously eventually it would come down. It makes sense when we see it that way, and it kind of stuck with me after all these years, that as long as we nibble away at what we're trying to do day by day, a little bit at a time, we will hit any goal, no matter how big the oak tree is or how small. It doesn't matter the size of the goal. And I'm like, that's pretty powerful, because I think sometimes we'll see the goal in front of us and we'll just think the mountain, and we'll think it's just completely overwhelming. So I hope that helps. Let me see, 100. Oh, and I love this. 100% the chances you will fail at something if you don't follow through. So I just want to leave you with that. If we don't try something, if we don't chip away at something, there's 100% chance you'll fail. But if you will never fail if you never stop. So I love this book. It was wonderful. And before we wrap up, I love to take questions. And so I just want to answer today's question. I just wanted to find it here. Let me see where it is. Oh my God, I can't find it. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, okay. So it says, this actually has to do with today. There's two questions, but I'll answer the other one next week. Will the music my child learns on this program, Color Me Mozart, help him if he eventually wants to learn another instrument such as the guitar? And so I briefly touched on that before. Absolutely. The idea with Color Me Mozart that I wanted every child to have was to have a solid music foundation, an appreciation and love of music. And music is music. That's what I love about language. It's the same way of learning your alphabet and writing and reading. Then you could write you could write short stories, you could write novels, you could write speeches, you could write TV shows, film scripts. It doesn't really matter. That you have the language and the tools to approach any type of project and whatever kind of path you want to take in the future. That was my idea for Color Me Mozart too. Just provide a really solid and wonderful music foundation to get your child to read, write, love, appreciate, and enjoy music with you, especially as a parent or a teacher. And then later in the future, they'll have all the tools they need to play the oboe, the guitar, the bassoon, timpani, whatever they want to play. So I hope that helps. Again, thanks so much for joining me. I love doing this. I'll see you guys next week. I don't know what next week's topic is, but we'll find something super fun. And I'll check you guys then. Bye.